One. Welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. I'm Badge, Ian, and John Gaylott from Freeport joins us today as our very special guest. Coach, how are you doing?
Well, thank you.
Well, good. We just had a little off-camera, nice conversation in that, but you've had a pretty good season. But also, you've gone through some tough times there too, where, you had a couple of down weeks. So take us through, the start of the season through the middle of the season, and then where are you at right now?
We start out last year. We had quite a few freshmen and sophomores playing. So this coming season, we felt like we took our lumps last year. Just being young and, but, inexperienced, but we thought that experience coming back could help. But second year in a row, we had a number of injuries to key players. Our quarterback, we lost him because of an illness. We're down 6 starters, and we're once again relying on freshmen. We have 3 freshmen that are starting for us now, and the kids battle constantly. I'm so proud of them with the effort that they put in, the work ethic that they have, and very blessed to coach them, and also very blessed to be 3-1 right now. We have the COVID virus there. Hit close to us, so we were off for 2 weeks. And then we rebounded with Burrell, which is a big game, rival game for us. Ever since I went to school and played for Freeport, it was always them and Jeanette were the two games that you wanted to win each year. And started out a little bit slow, a little rusty, but then we turned it on and did extremely well. After having 2 weeks without seeing the kids, practicing or anything, for them to come back and would get really like 4 days to get prepared.
Wow.
They really showed their resilience. So I can't say enough about the kids that we have, our administration, just our school in general. There's a rich tradition here, and everybody comes together, and when people are down and it doesn't look like it's going to turn out well, we have a number of kids step up, and it's just amazing to watch this season.
Yeah, that's great. So I was wondering, how did you keep your team focused and prepared with those 2 weeks you guys had to take off because of the COVID case?
I had a Zoom meeting, and at that point, we had 2 wins and a loss, and they just told them that here's the situation, try to make playoffs. We're going to try to make up the games if we could, and see where we go from there. I really didn't know how the WPIAL, because we're going to have 2 games less than everybody else. So how they factor that in. But we have, in case we don't make playoffs, we have, plan B to where we can maybe pick up another game or 2 to get experience. The whole thing for us is we're so young that we just need reps, and we need to play the game, and so we can learn from mistakes and move on. So that's our focus right now. We love to make playoffs, but we have North Catholic this week, and they're an extremely talented group of football players there. So it's going to be a huge task for us.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too. I mean, Freeport's really known for playing tough, hard-nosed defense, especially. I mean, you guys have had some great defensive performances over the year. That one year against Washington in the playoffs where you just shut down their running
Yeah.
game, which was outstanding. So how are you guys preparing for a North Catholic team that's averaging close to 50 a game?
Yeah, just like we always do. We just look at each game as an individual, really, and key on what they're successful with, and without giving too many of our secrets, how we game plan and
Yeah.
stuff, because I don't want the opponents to know what we're doing. But
Yeah, of course.
my defensive coordinator Todd Duran is amazing at schemes. We run a base 3-4 defense, but we like it because you can jump into different things from that base, and we without saying like our philosophy behind it, because that would give everything away, that we just want to play hard-nosed football. Our goal is to be more physical than our opponent that night, and if we do that, everything else will take care of itself. And our kids are young, but maybe they don't know yet, but they're full of energy, and they fly around and hit. And that's always been Freeport. We might not be the biggest, but we'll go toe to toe in battle. And our thing is, when you look at yourself in the mirror, did you honestly out hit your opponent? And we demand that the answer is yes.
I heard you say that you had played for Freeport. Is that correct, Coach? I mean that, and now
Yes,
you're the
sir.
head coach. I mean, I know it's obviously a long trip between playing and being the head coach, but what does it mean to you personally to carry on? You talked about that tradition or whatever like that, but what does that mean to you personally to carry on that tradition that you were a part of as a player, and now you're part of and carrying that on as a head coach of Freeport?
It means the world to me. When I had the school district gave me the opportunity to be the head coach 13 years ago. I grew up watching Coach King, senior, and became very good friends with his son, Mike King, who coached at Knock. He's with us on staff for a year. He came to help us out. And then playing for Don Early, his last year was my sophomore year in high school. We made the playoffs and went to played Riverside up at Butler, and we lost the semifinals, one step from going to, then it was Three River Stadium. But, and then Coach Keppel, playing 2 years for him. It still touches my heart to know that they're no longer with us. We have pictures in our team room when you walk in. They're right above the archway. All three of those coaches. Just growing up and knowing that the rich tradition that we have and having the opportunity. I remember 13 years ago, my big thing was that it wasn't screwed up, what they created. And, we as a staff, 90% of us are ex-players of theirs. And we have players, I have 5 or 6 of my assistants actually played for us, 10, 13 years ago, and they come back. So it's like the Freeport way. Coach Duran played at Knock. He's a outstanding safety at Slippery Rock. But his son, how I hooked up with Todd Duran was his son played for us my first year He was a sophomore, and I got him on staff. So he's been the one coach that's been with me the longest. And, you know, out of the 13, he's been with me 12 out of 13 years.
Wow.
And, you know, I have the Brzezinski brothers, you know, Hughes, they all played. You know, they're coaching with us. So it's really, it's Freeport kids that played the game, for Don Early, for Gary Keppel, you know, Bill Dillon, you know, Osberg, number of them. There's just we're blessed with great coaches, and we just don't want to screw up what they created. You know, we just try to hold our own and, you know, just make everybody proud.
I think you've certainly done a great job of that. You guys have made the playoffs in 8 of the 12 previous years you've been head coach, and that great run to the semifinals in 2015 with that big win over Washington that I mentioned. And maybe almost more importantly than that, you're 11-2 against Burrell now, which, you know, so
Yeah, that makes me happy.
Yeah. So after, not to bring up old wounds, but after the way the Burrow game ended last year, how good did this win feel this year?
There's when it was coming on, and you know, they said that they could, you know, any game could be canceled because if somebody was, you know, exposed, not really have it, because that's what happened with us. We were exposed to it. So we I remember telling my staff, I said, I don't know if I could go another year with waiting to have redemption. And the thing is that the Burroughs coaching staff is a great coaching staff, and I have all the respect in the world for them. And you know, we get together, we do 7-on-7s, you know, with all the Alakiski teams around here, and you know, I have all the respect for them. But just like most of the teams, we're very close to each other. But when it comes time for game time, we both want to beat each other the worst way. And it just, that was a good feeling, because honestly, I thought they had a lot of talent on that team, and we didn't have our full team that we started with. You know, we're having six starters out, and 4 of them were two-way starters. You know, from what these young kids overcame, and put us in the position to win. That makes me smile.
Yeah, it sounds like things have gone very well, you know, for you as head coach. I mean, amazing, you know, how you're carrying on the tradition, you know, from you as a player, and now 13 years as the head coach, and all of your staff members being, you know, players as well. That's just, you know, incredible. So many great stories, Ian, that, you know, we're getting on the show of all of the teams here, you know, in the WPIAL. You know, Coach, I can't thank you enough for, you know, sharing some time with Ian and myself. You know, any message you want to tell the community before, you know, the game here with North Catholic?
Just that we're going to show up, and we're going to do the best we possibly can, and our goal is to out-hit them. That's basically it.
That's a pretty simple recipe for success. Well, listen, John, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure meeting you. And, you know, obviously some of the things we talked about go way, way back, even with this show, the tradition with, you know, Ian and everything we found out tonight. So thank you very much. And, you know, best of luck this week with North Catholic.
Hey, thank you, sir.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks a lot for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.
Right. Yeah. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yep. All right, Ian. Wow. You know, John, it was very nice for him to, you know, come on tonight. And wow, you know, another great story, man. You're coming up with these great stories. Fort Cherry last week with the 3 generations. And now John, a player, now head coach with a staff, of former players. I don't know how you're going to top all these, stories week to week, man. You're doing a great job in putting these people together. Just tremendous, and all of the things that they've gone through related to COVID and winning against their arch rival. I mean, just great stuff. What do you think?
Oh yeah, and we talked about it last week on the show that game against Burrow is one of those games where, both teams have it circled on their calendars, and it doesn't matter what the records are. You can throw the records out the window for that game. There's been years when Burrow hasn't been very good, but they've played a tight competitive game against Freeport, and those kids, that win would have mattered more than any other win on the schedule. So for them to be able to get back for that game after, like Coach Gaylott said, they had the exposure to the COVID case. They didn't have it on their team, but they had an exposure. They had to take 2 weeks off, and then bouncing back to have that first game back be against your arch rivals definitely fueled them to come back strong. And some of the stories he told about the injuries they've had, the young kids they've had to put in, it's great to see the coaching staff, especially, not only preparing these kids now, but also having kind of that plan B where if they don't make the playoffs, they want to get some more reps. We talked about that last week on this show, that, what are teams going to do for the next few weeks? And we talked about some teams may try and go out and find more games just to try and get their young players reps. And Freeport looks like it's one of them. But I think they have a pretty good chance to make the playoffs too. We'll talk about that a little later in the show. They're in pretty good position as far as how the other teams are penciling out in 3A.
Yeah, and they've got a really tough test against North Catholic, as Coach didn't want to devise a game plan. How do you game plan against a team who's like just averaging about 50 points a game? I mean, that's kind of crazy, and I've got to believe that it's really tough too to game plan, because, when in the margin of victory that North Catholic is putting on their opponents, they're really not, pulling out all the stops. They're really not putting everything. They're not having to put everything out on film. So I imagine they still have a lot of things stashed away for those games like this one against Freeport, that they haven't seen or can game plan against. What do you think about that?
I think that's certainly possible. I think one of the other difficulties of having games canceled is there just isn't as much film out there on your team. Now, North Catholic's played all 6 of their games, so there's probably more film out there on them than there is, conversely, the other way on Freeport, who's only played 4 games so far this year. And, with the number of players Freeport's had to shuffle in and out of their lineup, which is a credit to them that they've been able to run up a 3-1 record so far. But they are kind of a continually evolving team that you don't really know what you're going to get from them from week to week. From North Catholic's standpoint, now I will fully admit that I'm a little biased as a North Catholic alumni, but their running game has been really tough to stop this year. Their top, I think, 5 or 6 running backs are all averaging over 7 yards a carry, which is just crazy
incredible
to think about. Yeah. And well, I shouldn't even say running backs, because one of them's their quarterback, Joey Prentice. He's thrown for over 900 yards and run for over 400, and thrown 14 touchdown passes and run for 11. So, I mean, I'm not going to try and game plan for Coach Gaylott. I'm not a coach, but if I was looking just at North Catholic statistically, and I saw you had a quarterback who's thrown for almost 1,000 yards and run for over 400, and accounted for 25 total touchdowns, probably focus on trying to stop him. But those dual threat quarterbacks are so hard to stop, because you don't know, especially with the run pass option kind of offenses that a lot of schools have installed now, they could run or throw on any given play. And, sometimes your linebackers or your safeties get caught on a play action pass, and then you got guys running past you. North Catholic's got some really good wide receivers too, especially Nick Mayer. So it's going to be a big challenge for Freeport. And, but North has done a lot of damage on the ground this year. And so like I said, I'm I have a bit of a personal connection with John. He's a teacher at Freeport too. He taught with my mom for a number of years. So I wish him all the best, and all the best luck this week. But I'm also pulling for my alma mater.
Yeah, it's got to be torn there. I mean, such a great story, but then, yeah, you got your alma mater there. So I think I gave you the opportunity to share your screen. So why don't we get into, I mean, the
Yeah, the heart of it
standings or
here.
what have you.
Yes. So
there
all
it
right.
is.
There we go. Okay. So I have a large presentation this week with a lot of content. So we'll try and take our time
Exactly.
and
Yeah,
get
we'll
through
get
it.
into that. All right.
Yep. So the typical way that the WPIAL has determined the standings is based on conference record, head-to-head results, Gardner points, and WPIAL tiebreaker points. Some of those may not come into play this year because, as you will see, what's new for 2020 is that the WPIAL has decided that if the standings can't be determined by traditional methods, the steering committee will essentially function like the NCAA tournament selection committee and pick the teams that will make the playoffs.
Well,
So,
let me ask you a quick question. So
yes.
what does that mean? If standings cannot be determined by traditional method, who's going to make that determination?
The WPIAL steering committee will make the determination of which teams.
And when will they make that determination?
So how it typically happens is the regular season concludes this week on Friday, and then there's a couple games Saturday. So the steering committee usually meets Monday morning and comes up with the playoff brackets that are then revealed Monday night, usually at a hotel in Greentree, but they're not doing that this year. They're doing it virtually. So
Greentree. I used to stay in Greentree all the time, man.
It's very convenient. It's
very
real close to
convenient. Just
downtown.
on the other side of the mountain. See, I wanted to make sure you knew. I knew my way around there a little bit too.
Yeah. So, and that's typically how it's worked. For as long as I can remember, that the brackets get revealed on Monday night, but by the end of the day, Saturday, you already knew who was making the playoffs based on the standings. It was really just who are you going to play.
Right.
Whereas this year, there's some more uncertainty on who's going to make the playoffs, in addition to who they're going to play. So a little bit tougher task for the steering committee, but I think it's doable. I'll go through it some, but there's a lot of options that they have.
You don't mind me asking you these questions, do you?
Not at all. Not at all. See, it was a perfect
I'm just trying to. I'm just for our other, obviously for our other viewers from all over the state and all over the country. I guess I'm their duly appointed representative. So
well, it's good to have that too, because I've been following this stuff for so long that I can just breeze through it. It's good to have that check of, hey, let's make sure we all understand what's going on.
Right.
Here.
Well, that's the whole reason why we have this show, is so that I'm kind of like like I said, duly appointed representative, to make sure that the rest of the state can understand the WPIAL better.
Yes. So on our next slide, we have the playoff qualifiers. So in 6A, it's 4 playoff teams. In all the other classifications, it's 8. And in 5A, 4A, 3A, and 1A, there are 3 conferences in each. So in theory, if the standings work out right, the top 2 teams from each conference will make the playoffs in those classifications, plus 2 wild cards, which will be determined by the WPIAL. We'll get into it in a minute, but if those top 2 spots can't be determined, the WPIAL may make a decision on, which teams should qualify.
And if they can't make the determination, is it because of tiebreakers or just not enough games to qualify?
It would be a not enough games kind of thing. Especially in 6A with only 4 playoff teams, it could potentially get really tough. I'll talk about that in a minute. The one concluding thought here is in 2A, there are 4 conferences. So the WPIAL has said that only the 4 conference champions are guaranteed playoff spots. The other 4 spots will be wild cards that they will determine. The other big difference this year is in the past, only 1 wild card per conference could qualify for the playoffs, but they've gotten away from that this year. And they actually said that they're reserving the right to pick more than 1 wild card from the same conference. So that was actually a point of contention back in 2016. Beaver was the number 1 ranked team in the state going into in 3A, going into the last week of the season. They lost a game. They'd beaten Aliquippa earlier in the year. They lost a game to Central Valley and wound up missing the playoffs because of how the tiebreakers worked out. You had Aliquippa, Beaver Falls, Central Valley, and Beaver were all in the top 4 in that conference. Arguably, like, Beaver was the number 1 ranked team in the state going into week 9. Aliquippa wound up getting the number 1 seed in the WPIAL playoffs, and Beaver Falls wound up winning the state championship that
Wow.
year. So that was like arguably 3 of the top probably 5 teams in the state were in that conference. And Beaver didn't make the playoffs because they wound up finishing 4th. They had a 7-2 overall record that year. They finished 4th in their conference at 7-2 and missed the playoffs because a 4th place team couldn't get a wild card. And South Park, who was like 5-5 overall, wound up getting a wild card from another conference just because of how it all worked out, because they were in 3rd place and the 3rd place teams were eligible. So I'm really glad to see that the WPIAL is doing away with the only 1 wild card per conference requirement. And I hope that becomes permanent and isn't just a 2020 thing.
Well, maybe something good's going to come out of this then.
Maybe. We'll see. In 6A, North Allegheny, their game against Hempfield this week was canceled because Hempfield had a COVID situation last week. So Hempfield's game last week and this week were both canceled. But that pretty much leaves North Allegheny as the only undefeated team, which essentially locks up their spot in the playoffs. Big game this week between Seneca Valley and Mount Lebanon, and the Central Catholic against Baldwin game. Baldwin narrowly lost to Seneca Valley last week. It went to overtime. Baldwin kicked a field goal first, and then Seneca Valley scored a touchdown. So Seneca Valley beat Baldwin by just 3 last week. So the difference between like 2nd place and 6th place here is not a whole lot. And the thing that could get crazy, I know looking at the standings here, it's like, oh yeah, North Allegheny, Seneca Valley, Mount Lebanon, Central Catholic. There's your 4 playoff teams, nice and easy. Well, Mount Lebanon lost to Cannon McMillan, who's in 5th place. So if Seneca Valley beats Mount Lebanon falls to 3 losses, and Cannon McMillan's playing Norwin, who's been awful this year. They have the worst defense in 6A. They're in last place. So Cannon Mac should win that game, which will get them up to 3-3, which potentially could hop them over Mount Lebanon, depending on how the tiebreakers work out. But this is also a situation, like we talked about, hard to figure out the standings. If Baldwin beats Central Catholic, Baldwin will be 2-2.
Yeah,
and Central Catholic will
WPIAL chaos.
Right. And Central Catholic will be 3-3. So they'll both be essentially 500 teams. And, then the question starts to become, how do you start to sort that out? And then Baldwin didn't play Cannon McMillan this year. That game got canceled. So there's going to be some question marks. The easiest solution here is if Mount Lebanon beats Seneca Valley and Central Catholic beats Baldwin. That's the easiest scenario.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
On Central Catholic.
Yes.
Have they not, played to expectations this season, in your opinion?
That's a tough question to answer because their best player opted out of the whole season.
Right.
I think their best player is Elliot Donald, who's the nephew of Aaron Donald, who is a pretty good player, putting it mildly. Elliot Donald's already committed to go to Pitt next year, continuing the Donald family tradition. So we wish him the best of luck. But I think, looking at a defensive line that had Elliot Donald in the middle and then 3 other kids who were going to who are getting recruited to play college football, not at the Power 5 conference level. No, probably more, I'd say, the FCS level type, but nevertheless, still that was going to be a heck of a defensive line, but without Elliot Donald in the middle, they've given up some more points this year than we kind of thought they would. So the other thing with Central Catholic is they have a very good running game, but they don't have a good passing game at all. And Mount Lebanon threw the ball all over the yard on them. And actually Mount Lebanon stormed back. They were down, I think it was 30-17, and Mount Lebanon came back and won 37-30. So the other game that Central lost was to North Allegheny, and North Allegheny just shut down their running game, basically did the same thing. So that's one of those teams where they have a really good ground game, but if you can stop them and get them down by a couple touchdowns, they don't have the passing game to come back. So 2 losses is absolutely a down year by Central Catholic standards.
Yeah, that was the reason for the question.
Yeah. But I also think they're good enough. I would not be shocked if they wound up winning the WPIAL title at the end of the day either. I mean, North Allegheny is really good, and North Allegheny took it to Central Catholic. Actually, Mount Lebanon's played North Allegheny the closest. That was a 14-11 game. So I'm really hoping Mount Lebanon gets into the playoffs, because I think Mount Lebanon has a chance for one of their best seasons in years. And their head coach is now Bob Palco, whose name you might know from West
Yeah,
Allegheny. That
sure.
Bob Palco won, I believe it was 8 WPIAL titles at West Allegheny, which was the most that any coach had won. And then he retired from there, took a year off, and took the Mount Lebanon job last year. And they made the playoffs, made it to the semifinals, but they haven't been to a championship game since, oh boy, I think it was 2000. Let me pull up my spreadsheet here. Well,
The
I'll look it
man
up.
of
We'll talk about that.
statistics.
Oh,
That's
yes,
okay.
yeah, I have a spreadsheet with all of the WPIAL playoff history of all time. Yes, 2000. I was right. Okay. Yes, Mount Lebanon won the WPIAL title in 2000. That was the last time they've reached a championship game. So
Wow.
I think they're good enough to make a run this year. I just hope they get to the playoffs. But Seneca Valley also didn't play North Allegheny this year because that game got canceled. So
Right.
really anything could happen once the playoffs roll around. But Central Catholic did kill Seneca Valley, so that's working in Central's favor for making a playoff spot. So we'll see what happens here, and I'll talk about 6A again at the end as well. I have some predictions for you. So in 5A, in the Allegheny 6 Conference, Peters Township, who lost in the WPIAL championship game last year, is off to an unbeaten start and already clinched the conference title. Big game here this week is between Upper St. Clair and South Fayette. So as you'll remember, there's 3 conferences in 5A. So the top 2 teams are guaranteed playoff spots if it can be figured out using normal standards. And this would be a normal standard that St. Clair and South Fayette are both 3-1. They play this week in the last week of the season. So the winner will get 2nd place and the loser will get 3rd place. That's pretty simple and straightforward.
Yeah. Basically, it's almost a playoff game.
Yes. Yeah. The loser may have a chance to get one of the wild cards, but yeah, it's essentially a playoff game. In the Big East Conference, there are some big question marks here just because Gateway missed 3 games this season, 2 of them conference games, because of a COVID, or they missed 2 games from a COVID exposure on their team. And then Penn Trafford had to cancel against Gateway because they had an exposure. So
Who is Gateway's wins against?
Gateway beat Franklin Regional and Woodland Hills. So what is working for Gateway here is that Woodland Hills is 2-2 in the middle with a win over Franklin Regional. And both Penn Trafford and Gateway both beat Woodland Hills, and Gateway also beat Franklin Regional. So there's really no question that Gateway is one of the top 2 teams in this conference. So I don't see any problem with them. They should make the playoffs, no problem. Penn Trafford's definitely in the playoffs. The question is just kind of where do those teams get seated, just because they didn't play each other for the conference title this year.
So do you think that then the committee is really the teams might be easy to pick, but the seeding might be the issue with the committee in having to determine how it all shakes out then?
Yes. And I actually have some slides on the seating at the end of the presentation. So
Great.
I was
I
very
wouldn't expect
prepared
anything
for
less
tonight.
from
I wasn't a Boy Scout, but I'm always prepared. So in the Northeast Conference, Pine Richland is arguably one of the best 5A teams in the state. They've been so good moving down from 6A this year. They've just killed everyone they played. We talked a little bit about their game with North Hills coming into this week, and they just blew North Hills out of the water. Penn Hills is going to finish in 2nd place because they have wins over both North Hills and Fox Chapel. So they're secure in their 2nd place spot, which should get them into the playoffs. By the way, I understand how the WPIAL tiebreakers are going to work, that they said that the top 2 should get in. So Penn Hills should get in. But Penn Hills did lose a game earlier this year to Woodland Hills in a non-conference game. But as you'll remember, Woodland Hills is sitting here in 3rd place. So when you start to look at seedings and who should get wild cards, Woodland Hills is probably in a pretty good spot for a wild card, considering they have that win over Penn Hills.
Okay.
Oh, and just to back up 1 second, North Hills is playing Fox Chapel for the third place spot in this conference, but the winner of that game is only going to be 3-4 overall. So I have a hard time seeing a WPIAL putting a team with a losing record in the playoffs. So probably an uphill battle for the winner of that game to get a wild card spot, but I mean, crazy things have happened. You never know when you let people make decisions. And since this has never really happened before, that the WPIAL has chosen teams, I don't have much precedent to go off of to say, yeah, this is who they're going to pick. I'm just kind of looking at records and games and saying, this is who I think they should take.
What you think, right?
Yep. In the Big East Conference in 4A, we've talked a lot about Thomas Jefferson this season. They've run away with every game they played. Big win over Ringgold again this past week. Bell Vernon in second place at 5-1. Only 2 teams this year have scored against Bell Vernon, which was Thomas Jefferson putting up 42 points and then Trinity scoring 14 this past week. Bell Vernon isn't playing this week, so they're locked into a playoff spot. That's not COVID related. They had a game scheduled against Uniontown, but Uniontown kind of just opted out of most of their schedule against the good teams because they had decided they weren't going to play, then they decided they were going to play, but they didn't have a lot of time to prep for the season, so they only picked up a couple games on the schedule. Didn't really want to play the good teams.
What
Uniontown
kind of
has the longest
example does
losing
that
streak.
set?
I mean, Uniontown has the longest losing streak in the state.
What kind of
so
an example does that set? I mean, football's about life lessons,
It is. That's true.
I mean, it's like, all right, we're going to do it. We're not going to do it. And then we're going to do it, but then we're not going to do everything.
Yeah.
And I know they've got a long losing streak, but it is what it is.
It is. And they got put in a tough spot this year too, because they played in 3A the last 2 years, and with the long losing streak, obviously they didn't win any games the last 2 years in 3A, and then
your reward is you got moved up to 4A. Yeah, right.
Right, because of enrollment. So they had to play in a tougher conference in a higher classification, and that just is what it is.
Nobody knows me out in the WPIAL, so I guess I could be, a little bit of the, the fly in the ointment there. I know these are all your friends and that, so I get it.
I generally try not to speak poorly about anyone.
I wasn't speaking poorly. I'm just saying, what kind of life lessons does that teach you on either you're going to do something or you're not going to do something? And so anyway.
Yeah. The real wrench here potentially is McKeesport sitting in third place. That they play Thomas Jefferson this week. So if McKeesport beats Thomas Jefferson, we'll wind up with a 3-way tie for first place, which would certainly put McKeesport into the playoffs as one, or all 3 teams would make it. One of them would be a wild card, but they can get seeded anywhere. So that would potentially throw a wrench in the standings, but also kind of secure McKeesport's playoff spot. But I fully expect Thomas Jefferson to win that game. McKeesport should still be in the running, though. It's going to be interesting to see what the WPIAL decides as far as the 4A wildcards if Thomas Jefferson beats McKeesport, as they should do. Oops, missed one. There we go. In the Greater Allegheny Conference.
Yeah,
Plum with head coach Matt Morgan, who we talked to a few weeks ago.
Yeah, good luck. We've been good luck for him.
Yeah, we have. They clinched their. This is Plum's first outright conference title since 1982. They shared a conference title in 1983. So the way the WPIAL does it for conference titles is that if teams finish with the same record in conference play, regardless of head-to-head results, they will award trophies to both teams as co-champions of the conference. So like if Plum would go out and lose to Armstrong this week, both Plum and let's say Mars beats Indiana, so they both finish 6-1, Plum and Mars would both get conference co-champion trophies, even though Plum beat Mars head-to-head and would still be on top of the standings. So they've done that forever, that they've awarded co-champion titles kind of regardless of head-to-head results. So that's why I kind of made that differentiation between the outright and the shared title.
Right.
I know it was only 1 year different, but nevertheless, so big success for Plum. Most successful regular season since the 1980s.
And you like them this week against Armstrong?
Yes, yeah. Armstrong has a really good sophomore quarterback in Caden Olson. Actually, game of the week last week while we're here, Highlands came back. They were down I think they were down 23-6 against Armstrong, like halfway through the third quarter, and Highlands stormed back and scored the game-winning touchdown with like a minute left to beat them. I think it was 30-23. So a big win for Highlands in the middle of the pack against a solid Armstrong team. It was kind of comeback week in the WPIAL. We had a couple comebacks last week, Highlands being one of them. We talked about Mount Lebanon coming back against Central Catholic a few weeks ago. That was 2 weeks ago, but nevertheless, still fun to see teams come back. Hampton is locked into third place here in this conference. They have wins over both Highlands and Armstrong, so they're in good shape. They've got a game against Knock, who hasn't won a game yet this year. So Hampton's in a strong spot in third place and is one of those wild card contenders because they lost head-to-head to Mars early in the year. So Mars is also locked into second place in a playoff spot for the Fighting Planets, who have one of the best running backs.
Fighting Planets.
Yes, the Mars Fighting Planets.
It kind of reminds me of a team I grew up with, Indiana, the Fort Branch Twigs, I mean.
That's good. That's good.
So anyway.
I mean, Minersville's still probably one of the best nicknames, or Williamsport, but
Batlin Miners actually did their game with Pottsville this year, so broadcast that. So yeah. Batlin Miners.
Yep. Moving on to the Parkway Conference, Aliquippa coming off their big win over Chartiers Valley 2 weeks ago, got a win over Montour last week, very convincing win over Montour. So they're locked in first place, yet another conference title for Aliquippa, continuing on their fantastic tradition as a program. Pretty much anyone you put in front of them, they're going to go out there and battle till the end. I'm really looking forward to the playoffs this year to see Aliquippa against a team like Bell Vernon or Thomas Jefferson. I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, that's got to be a lot of fun to see these, teams that are traditional powerhouses that don't normally play one another. The same thing happened, here even in my own local conference where Berks Catholic moved up to, play all of the big boys in the Berks League. And, it adds for a totally new dimension of excitement. And that's really what the fans are looking for as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. A couple of years, the last 4 years, actually, we had South Fayette in 4A, and they, there was always this, South Fayette and Thomas Jefferson going to actually play each other because South Fayette had that long 64-game regular season conference winning streak. And so they would win their conference every year. But first couple years, they were seeded 1 and 2. And then like South Fayette got upset by Newcastle the first year in the playoffs, which was, looking back on it, a Newcastle team that featured Geno Stone, who's now playing safety for the Baltimore Ravens, and Marcus Hooker, who's the younger brother of Malik Hooker. Marcus is playing safety at Ohio State. Malik's playing safety for the Indianapolis Colts. So, I mean, that was a loaded Newcastle team that South Fayette lost to that year. But, we had to go a couple years before we finally saw that Thomas Jefferson South Fayette championship game, and it was one of the best WPIAL finals in recent memory. South Fayette actually won it. They went back and forth all game. South Fayette went up, I think it was 31-24, and then Thomas Jefferson was driving down the field or on the 6 or 7 yard line with a minute left and threw an interception on the goal line. Well, I shouldn't say threw an interception. The defensive back made a great play on the ball. He undercut a slant route and got an interception and sealed the victory for South Fayette. So it was just, and that actually was the only WPIAL final in the last, I think, 6 years that Thomas Jefferson has lost. So they've been, TJ's been an absolute powerhouse. So just to give a sense for how good Thomas Jefferson has been over the years. I mean, they've been a powerhouse in 4A the last 4 years. Won 3 championships, reached the championship game all 4 years. But before that, in AAA, dating back to 1998, there was only 1 year that they didn't make the semifinals. So and that was when you had 16 teams making the playoffs. So that was, they didn't get knocked out in the quarterfinals or the first round for only once between 1998 and 2020. I mean, that 2011 year is the only time they lost in the quarterfinals, that they made at least the semifinals every other year. They reached the championship game 12 times since 2003. They've been in a WPIAL championship game. They won 8 of them. So I'm just counting as I go. I should know these numbers off the top of my head. But it's just it's nuts how good they've been. Yeah. So yeah, Thomas Jefferson is certainly the one of the premier programs in the WPIAL. Actually,
in the state of Pennsylvania.
In the state of Pennsylvania, yeah. I actually did a top teams of the last decade post earlier this year, kind of right around when the pandemic hit, just as something fun to do, looking back over the last 10 years. And it should be no surprise, right? It was Clairton, it was Aliquippa, it was Thomas Jefferson were the top 3. Mm-hmm. So I kind of came up with a formula and had a mathematical way to figure it out, but it was fun to do and fun to talk about. Generated some argument on social media. The Aliquippa folks weren't too happy they were number 2, but it is what it is.
Numbers don't lie, right?
Yeah. I mean, looking back on it, kind of the way I set it up was mostly based on regular season wins and then playoff success, kind of with increasing values for progressing further in the playoffs. And Clairton over the last 10 years won 7 WPIAL titles and 3 state titles. And yes, Aliquippa made the championship game 10 times, but they only won 4 WPIAL titles and 1 state title. So, when you look at 7 district titles and 3 state titles versus 4 district titles and 1 state title, yeah, both those numbers are really impressive, but one of them's a lot bigger than the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Moving on to 3A, got a little sidetracked there. North Catholic obviously is that big game against Freeport this week. I think we've talked a lot about that. And don't sleep on East Allegheny here, sitting in what's now 3rd place because their only losses to North Catholic. The caveat here, though, is that East Allegheny didn't play Freeport because that was one of those games that got canceled because of COVID. So if North Catholic beats Freeport, both Freeport and East Allegheny will probably be 3-1 in the conference. So it's going to be up to the committee. Up to the committee to kind of determine how they get slotted into the playoffs. I think both of them should make it. That's my opinion. But we'll see how the committee decides that, because that is certainly going to be one where you can't determine who would have been in second place unless Freeport beats North Catholic. If Freeport beats North Catholic, then Freeport's the only undefeated team and they should be the top team. And then North Catholic will have beaten East Allegheny head to head. And it's pretty easy to figure out from there.
Yeah. You need your own set of bracketology things like the guy for ESPN. You need that for the WPIAL football tournament.
I do that too, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Okay. I do that for the NCAA tournament too. I have my own little bracketology thing. So if you ever want to have a bracketology show, we can do that in the spring too. That'd be a lot of fun.
All right. So we'll do it.
Branching out from football. In the Interstate Conference, Elizabeth Forward beat Mount Pleasant this past week 16-14. So they locked up the top spot in the Interstate. Mount Pleasant plays South Park this week. And a couple of sleeper teams here that South Park's coming off a loss to South Allegheny. So if South Park loses to Mount Pleasant, South Allegheny could actually hop up into that 3rd place spot. Or maybe Southmoreland, depending on how everything shakes out. They would have to upset Elizabeth Forward, who's on top of the conference and undefeated, which seems unlikely. But Southmoreland's played some close games this year, and they have a decent offense. So Elizabeth Forward has got a really good defense, has a kid in Chase Watton who just decided he's going to Bowling Green to play defensive end. He also plays tight end for them. So really good player, especially at the 3A level. Kids like that can dominate. But Elizabeth Forward is, I'll say, shown some cracks in that they've given up 14 points each of the last 2 weeks, which doesn't sound like showing cracks, but for a team that shut out like 4 of their first 5 opponents, or not 5, sorry, 3 of their first 4, it was a little bit of a crack on defense. But Elizabeth Forward's still the best team here. They're definitely in the playoffs, and then the winner of that Mount Pleasant South Park game will get in as well.
Yeah.
The loser, it's going to come down to a wild card for them. And then Central Valley, best 3A team in the state. I say that every week. They're coming off another big victory this past week. They're playing against an Avonworth team who narrowly beat Hopewell. Avonworth has a loss to Keystone Oaks, which even though Avonworth's record looks better than Keystone Oaks here, Keystone Oaks beat Avonworth head-to-head, so that's why I still have Avonworth below them in the standings. Keystone Oaks' game against Quaker Valley got canceled this past week because of a COVID exposure for Quaker Valley. So I'm not sure if we're going to see the bottom two teams play each other this week, if Quaker Valley is going to come back. But those other games are big. The Avonworth-Central Valley could potentially throw the top into a three-way tie if Avonworth wins, which I doubt it. Central Valley is just that much better. And then Keystone Oaks against Hopewell. Keystone Oaks narrowly beat Avonworth. Avonworth narrowly beat Hopewell. So,
Connect the dots, right?
Connect the dots, right? But if Hopewell springs the upset, then we could have a three-way tie for second place. So you never know. I think Hopewell, even if they beat KO, has a really uphill battle to make the playoffs just because they're 2-4 overall. And like I talked about before, I have a hard time seeing the WPIAL putting a team with a losing record in the playoffs when you have options for teams that have winning records overall. Into 2A, this is another one that's going to be kind of hard to decide because Sarah Catholic had a COVID exposure. So Sarah didn't play against the Apollo Ridge, and they're not going to play. So in theory, both Sarah and Apollo Ridge could wind up undefeated in the regular season. Sarah missed last week's game, and they didn't have a scheduled game this week. So they said they were going to take the 2 weeks off. And the other question here is just, can Sarah Catholic get back for the playoffs? Because, it's been said, take 2 weeks off for COVID, but I haven't heard any news from them whether or not they've had any additional cases. But if they have, there's certainly a question of whether or not they can make it back in time for the playoffs next week. One interesting thing the WPIAL could do, which I'll get into later, is I kind of actually hope they match up Apollo Ridge and Sarah Catholic in the first round of the playoffs to let them play that game that didn't get played in the regular
Do they have
season.
any contingencies out there that, at least for, a first round playoff game, that if somebody can't qualify, that they would plug somebody else in?
I have not heard that. The only thing I've heard so far is that if a team has to cancel, it's essentially a forfeit for a playoff game. So, I have not heard about a contingency plans for the playoffs, but we'll probably find out more next Monday night at the steering committee meeting when they announce the playoffs.
Yeah, because if they haven't started the playoffs and then somebody tests,
right.
You could just pick one more team and reseed everybody and play a full allotment of teams, whether it be 4 or 8.
Right. You could essentially, or even just plug someone else into that spot if you had to.
Yeah.
In the Century Conference, McGuffey beat Washington in week 1. That wins essentially just carried them through the rest of the regular season. Potential casket match here between Washington and Fraser this week. Casket match being a term from 1990s wrestling that, you put the winner had to put his opponent in a casket and he was done. So that's the term I like to use for a win and you're in the playoffs, and losing you go home type game. So Washington taking on Fraser for that second spot. But as you'll remember, only the conference champions are guaranteed playoff spots. So even the second place teams have to leave their fate up to the WPIAL steering committee with the wild cards. So I think the winner of Washington Fraser should get in, but still kind of a question mark just because we don't know.
Right.
In the Midwestern Conference, Beaver Falls is, I think, the best 2A team in the WPIAL. They've got their conference locked up. They're 2 games ahead of everyone else. Laurel, New Brighton, and Neshannock are all 4-2, but Laurel beat both of those other teams head to head. Laurel's losses were to Beaver Falls and to Freedom. So I think Laurel's in good shape to finish second in this conference just because they play winless Elwood City this week. But because they have those 2 losses, and there's going to be some other teams that only have probably 1, their playoff hopes are somewhat a little bit more in question. And this is where it comes down to, you look at a team like Sarah Catholic that's undefeated, but hasn't played as many games versus Laurel, who has 2 losses. I think Sarah probably gets in over Laurel. I don't think that's going to be the final decision, but that's going to be a decision. And then the last one, Stowe Rocks, massive victory this past week over Western Beaver. Stowe Rocks has been a great story. They had to forfeit their week 1 game because of academic eligibility issues to Carleton, who's now fallen all the way down to last place. So looks kind of weird to have Carleton with that big win over Stowe Rocks in the standings, but it is what it is with that game. But Stowe Rocks beat Western Beaver this past week to take over the first place spot. And a great story for Stowe Rocks. They've played in 1A the last few years and had to move up to 2A, graduated a lot of players, are playing a lot of young players, and haven't lost a game that they've actually taken the field for. So all the games that they've played, they've won, which should bode well for their playoff chances as well. They have a big game against Brentwood this week, though. That Brentwood's kind of hanging around there at 2-2. And Brentwood could potentially get themselves back into the playoff picture if they're able to win this game, although Brentwood just lost to Southside Beaver last week, which was a bit of a surprise. So something's still to be decided here in the Three Rivers Conference as far as who's gonna win the conference and make the playoffs. It's really down to Stowe Rocks or Western Beaver, though. That if Stowe Rocks loses, Western Beaver should win it. If Stowe Rocks wins, then they'll win the conference title outright, or they'll win the conference title with their head-to-head win over Western Beaver. Into 1A. Game of the week this week between Shenango and Rochester. Winner gets the Big 7 conference title. Loser will finish in second place because both teams have wins over Ulsh. Rochester's only loss this season was against Fort Cherry, which we talked a lot about last week when we interviewed Fort Cherry's head coach Tanner Gary. But both of these teams will make the playoffs because they have wins over Ulsh. So this is top 2 teams are in. Shenango's Reese Watkins, who was the second leading rusher in the WPIAL, got injured last week. So hopefully he's able to make it back for this game because this should be an exciting one with him and Rochester's running back Rashawn Reed, who are both really, really good players. In the Eastern Conference, Clairton is on top right now. They play Springdale this week, which is a huge game because Springdale had that very close loss to Jeanette a few weeks ago, and Jeanette lost to Clairton in week 1, which was also a relatively close game. So potentially if Springdale can upset Clairton, there could be a 3-way tie here. And Springdale does have some history with Clairton. They upset them back in the playoffs in the mid-2000s. I want to say it was 2008, but let me double check that just to make sure that I'm getting you the right year. So Clairton doesn't lose very often in the playoffs, but when they have, actually Springdale's beaten them twice in the last 30 years, which doesn't sound like much, but for a team like Clairton, for a team like Clairton that's won 7 out of the last 10 WPIAL titles, anytime they lose in the playoffs, it's certainly noteworthy. Oh, it was 2007. I was 1 year off. Okay. I was close. Springdale also beat Clairton in 2003, the year Springdale won the WPIAL title. So good note there. But yeah, so there's some history between those two programs. Granted, it's almost 20 years old now, but it should be a good game.
Oh, time flies, right?
Yeah, I know. Should be a really good game this week. Springdale was actually leading Jeanette for much of that game, and then had a bunch of second half turnovers, and Jeanette was able to come back and win. So if Springdale can control the ball against Clairton, that should be a fantastic game to keep an eye on. In the Tri-County South Conference, California beat Carmichael's this past week, securing the conference title for California. And California is not playing this week because Monessen, who just had a roster shortage, didn't have a lot of kids coming into the year, had a couple kids get injured. So Monessen had to forfeit their last 2 games against both Carmichael's and California. So Monessen forfeited this week to California, so California is not going to play a conference game, so they're locked in at the top spot. Carmichael's plays against Avella this week, who is still in the mix for a playoff spot. If Avella can beat Carmichael's, they'll jump up to second. So going back to our very first guest on the show that we had, Coach Cicchini from Avella.
Yeah.
Still in the mix.
Rooting for our guests.
Yes, everything comes together here. So we talked a bit about the playoff picture, so I'll run through those really quickly. In 6A, we had North Allegheny that's clinched their spot. Seneca Valley, I think, should be in because they only have 1 loss. And then the bubble teams are between Mount Lebanon, Central Catholic, Cannon McMillan, and Baldwin. And sort of my projected playoff bracket kind of depends on what happens between Seneca Valley and Mount Lebanon. But if the winner probably, I think, should get the 2nd seed. As long as Central Catholic beats Baldwin, they should get the 3rd seed. And then the 4th seed should come down to kind of what happens if Seneca Valley wins, then Canon McMillan might get that 4th spot, or if Mount Lebanon wins, I think Seneca Valley gets it. So my probable results based on what's happened if Mount Lebanon beats Seneca Valley and Central Catholic wins, my projected playoff bracket would be North Allegheny 1st, Mount Lebanon 2nd, Central 3rd, and Seneca Valley 4th. In 5A, we've got Pine Richland, Peters Township, and Penn Hills have all clinched spots. I think, like we talked about, Penn Trafford and Gateway both should be in. And I think since Gateway is undefeated, they'll probably wind up in one of the top 4 spots. And Penn Trafford's only loss was a 3-point loss to Peters Township in a non-conference game. So the way I'm looking at it, kind of depending on how the WPIAL decides to seed Penn Trafford and Gateway. So if they say we think Penn Trafford's better than Gateway, then Peters gets the 2 seed, Penn Trafford gets the 3, Gateway gets the 4. If they think Gateway's better than Penn Trafford because those two haven't played, then it's either going to be Peters Township or Gateway at the 2 seed, the other one at the 3 seed, and Penn Trafford will be the 4 seed. Bubble teams here.
You're just reemphasizing the reason why they've got to do it on a committee basis, because there's really no way to really make those determinations out on the field this year, it seems like.
Right. There really isn't, especially because they haven't even played the same number of games. Even if they had played the same number of games, you could have, factored in strength of victory,
or you could have put together some kind of power ranking, but you can't do that.
Right, especially when Penn Trafford has played 5 games and Gateway's played 3. Like it's really, and only 2 of those games were against common opponents so far.
And that's in District 3 here, they're trying to do that. They're trying to have it all based on a power ranking. And, teams are trying to play now extra games in the middle of the week so that they can get their power ranking up so that they can try and make the playoffs. I mean, it's just crazy stuff.
That is. Yep. And so last thoughts here is the Upper St. Clair South Fayette winner is definitely in. The loser, I think, should be in too. Woodland Hills, I talked about earlier, has those win over North Hills, which should knock North Hills out, even if they beat Fox Chapel. Franklin Regional is still kind of hanging around, but I think it would take something outstanding for them to get in over whoever loses the Upper St. Clair South Fayette game. So assuming that I went with the Upper St. Clair beats South Fayette example here, and I wound up seeding Gateway 2nd, Peters Township 3rd, and Penn Trafford 4th, kind of giving Gateway the benefit of the doubt of, they're the defending WPIAL champions. We're going to put them on one of the top lines. I mean, Pine Richland's just been so good. They have to be the number 1 seed. Yeah. The other thing I took into account here is, of these 8 teams, if I rank them in true rankings 1 through 8, Penn Hills would probably be number 8, but Penn Hills and Pine Richland are in the same conference, so I tried to separate conference opponents, which moved Penn Hills up to that 7th spot and dropped South Fayette down to the 8th spot. In 4A, this one's really straightforward. It's, Thomas Jefferson should be the number 1 seed. Aliquip is undefeated. They should be the number 2 seed. I think Bell Vernon's the 3rd best team here. They should be the number 3 seed. Plumbing and Chartiers Valley is a convergence of 2 great storylines. I think that would be a great first-round matchup. And I would be really surprised if they put Thomas Jefferson and Bell Vernon on the same half of the bracket, just because they met in the championship game last year. I think they're going to want to separate those 2 teams. So putting Bell Vernon on the bottom half of the bracket and Thomas Jefferson on the top half sets up a potential championship game rematch there. And then Mars is already in. We talked about that. And the wild card spots really come down to McKeesport, Hampton, and Montour. Assuming Thomas Jefferson beats McKeesport, Hampton and Montour are both playing teams that haven't won a game yet this year. So all 3 of those teams could potentially wind up 5-2 overall. And then I don't know how they're going to pick it. But since Thomas Jefferson and McKeesport are in the same conference, that's why I didn't list McKeesport here on the 8 line. They're only potentially on the 7 line. Right. And then Montour's in a conference with Aliquip.
Yeah, but if you do them that way, then you have the opportunity for them to play for the championship. So why wouldn't you put them to where at least they're going to do a first round game rather than an opportunity that, well, but as you pointed out, Aliquippa is most likely going to come out of there. So, trying to get Aliquippa against a Thomas Jefferson matchup would be the way that they would want to seed it, right?
I think so. I think you want to split up TJ and Bell Vernon too, since they're in the same conference and met in the final last year. So I think TJ 1, Aliquippa 2, Bell Vernon 3 is the way to go in 4A. In 3A, this one's also pretty straightforward, I think. Even though we talked about there's a lot of uncertainty, kind of assuming North Catholic beats Freeport is more or less what this bracket's based on. But Central Valley being the top seed, North Catholic being second seed, Elizabeth Forward also undefeated being the 3 seed. And then they're going to have to pick a team to be the 4th seed. I picked East Allegheny because they'd be, if North Catholic beats Freeport, East Allegheny will be the only other team with 1 loss. Everyone else will have at least 2 overall. So I slotted East Allegheny in 4th, and then just kind of match teams based on, so they don't play someone from their own conference. Also, North Catholic and Avonworth for a long time had a pretty strong rivalry down in Single A when they played back in the early 2010s decade before we split into 4 classifications. So I'd like to see North Catholic play Avonworth again, just for selfish reasons, because they were kind of old rivals. And then I also assumed here that if the winner of the Mount Pleasant South Park game would land on the 8 seed line, that the 2 wild cards would go to, I guess, Freeport and Avonworth here, who I probably think they should go that way.
Yeah, we'll pick Freeport since Coach
yeah.
decided to come on our show.
Yeah. Freeport's 3-0 in conference. They haven't played East Allegheny, so I don't see a way you can put East Allegheny in the playoffs and Freeport out if they both have 1 loss to North Catholic and they haven't played each other.
Right.
I don't see how you can pick one over the other. In 2A, this one's a lot more complicated just because of the WPIAL's going to pick 4.
You got more bubble
teams
than anyone so far. That's for sure.
Yeah, and this is kind of because the 4 conference champions make it, and then the other 4 spots are all filled by teams that the WPIAL is going to pick. So I kind of looked at who are all the teams that have winning records and how could that potentially shake out. One team out of Stowe Rocks and Western Beaver is going to win that conference title, so they'll get in for sure. I think, like we talked about with Apollo Ridge and Sarah Catholic, I think both of those teams should be in. I actually slotted them in the 4-5 matchup just to see them play in the first round, because I'd like to see them get a chance to play and kind of determine who would have been the conference champion anyways. And I think that's a fair matchup to slot into that spot as well. Just kind of looking at how everything lines up. And I'm not really sure where the WPIAL is going to seed Stowe Rocks, just because of that forfeit. So they could be as high as the 2 seed because they'd won all the games they actually played. McGuffey's lost only 1 game, and that was to an out-of-state team that they scheduled because they had an open week on their schedule. It was a scheduled off week for them, and they scheduled against a team from West Virginia.
It's not a loss in points. It just shows on their record.
Right. And the WPIAL traditionally has not counted those like out of state games again, or out of conference games against them. Usually they've always determined the playoffs just based on conference record, but a little bit different this year. You kind of have to take some of those other games into account. For instance, Ligonier Valley beat Fraser this year. So, if you're looking at wild card teams potentially, Ligonier Valley, if they beat Shadyside this week, they'll be 2-2 in their conference, would be 4-3 overall. If Fraser loses to Washington, they'd be 4-2 in their conference, but 4-3 overall. So same overall record, but Ligonier Valley beat Fraser head-to-head in a non-conference game. So that's why Ligonier Valley's here at the bottom of the list, is very outside shot, I think, but still potentially a shot. So based on kind of how I think things will shake out, I slotted Beaver Falls first, McGuffey second, Stowe Rocks third, and then that Apollo Ridge Sarah Catholic game in the 4-5 slot, and then just kind of filled teams in based on I don't think Western Beaver is the 8th best team, but because Beaver Falls and Laurel are in the same conference, I want to reach for around here, so I bumped Laurel up to 7 and Western Beaver down to 8. Just kind of how things had to shake out with teams from different conferences, trying to avoid first-round rematches. The WPIAL usually tries to avoid those. They've done them a few times in the
That was
past,
going to
but
be
they
my question,
typically
is
try and
why are you
avoid it.
doing that?
Yeah, that's just based on how they've traditionally operated. They traditionally have not rematched teams from the same conference in the first round. On occasion they have, but it's been rare. And then in 1A, this looks complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. That Clairton's the best team, and then Shenango and Jeanette should be the second and third seeds. California will probably be the fourth seed. Assuming Shenango and Rochester are playing for the conference title this week. So if Rochester beats Shenango, that throws a little wrench into things. If Springdale beats Clairton, that could throw a little wrench into things. But really, Clairton, Shenango, Rochester, California, Jeanette, Springdale, Olsh, and Carmichael's should be the 8 playoff teams in 1A, unless Carmichael's loses to Avella, then Avella gets in. But really, this is kind of how I see it shaking out. Assuming Shenango beats Rochester, I think they'll be the 2 seed. I think you want to, even though California is undefeated, I think Jeanette's the second. I think Jeanette's actually the second best team in 1A, but I think with Shenango being undefeated, they'll get the second seed. But I think Clairton and Jeanette need to be on opposite halves of the bracket just for a potential rematch in a WPIAL final. So putting Jeanette at 3 and then California at 4. Springdale's been really good this year. I think they should get in as a wild, even though they'd be a wild card. I think they're still the 5th best team. I did that also so that Springdale wouldn't be the 6th seed and rematch with Jeanette, who's in their conference, to have Rochester against Jeanette, and then that'd be a rematch of a game a few years ago when Rochester upset an undefeated Jeanette in the semifinals to reach the WPIAL championship game. That was the year after Jeanette had won the state title,
Right.
ran through the regular season, beat Clairton in the regular season finale. They were rolling into the playoffs, and then they got upset by Rochester in the semifinals. So there'd be some memories there for that game, some bad blood to settle, and then Olsh getting the last wild card spot.
So what you're hoping for with all these scenarios is that the WPIAL follows tradition and not schedule conference opponents in first round games, and B, you're expecting him to create the sexy matchups.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So you're doing it as a fan.
Somewhat. I'll say I'm doing it. Yeah, and I'll say I'm doing it as a fan with some basis of historical knowledge for what they've traditionally done in the past too.
Well, that's good though. I mean,
yes.
Ian, incredible effort putting all of that together. And so, when are all of these things going to be? They're going to put them in a mayonnaise jar on Funkin' Wagnall's porch and then open it up Monday at some undisclosed hotel in Greentree.
I think they're actually just going to do it at the WPIAL offices this year rather than at the hotel, because they're not having a public event for the media. So, so they're supposed to live stream it Monday night, and we'll see what gets revealed and what all happens. I've watched the live stream of it the last few years, and typically what has happened is they come out and they talk a whole bunch at the beginning, and then someone runs into technical problems, and you don't actually see the brackets until the reporters that are there start tweeting them out. So hopefully they've improved their live streaming capabilities this year, and it goes a little better on the live stream end.
Well, either way, I mean, we're going to find out one way, shape, or form. So let me ask you this question, and this is just related to the show next week. So are you going to have opportunity to put anything together before we we record this show at about 9:30 at night on Monday? We're going to have to do it later. We're going to have to do it Tuesday. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll play it by ear. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
I should be able to talk through it once I have the brackets. We can definitely.
You already have the brackets made out. You know exactly what's going to happen. You just need to plug in the team names there. But that's good. I mean, fresh news. I mean, breaking news on the WPIAL Blitz show next Monday. How about that?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Well, it's an enormous amount of fun to be a partner in your enthusiasm for the WPIAL. I can tell you, it's becoming infectious to me too. I mean, I've followed around, even though it's been an abbreviated season, following along all these things with all these matchups, following the storylines. It's been great fun for me. And gosh, the culmination is next week. That's incredible how fast it's been. What do you think?
It is, and yeah, I always feel like the night that the playoff brackets get announced is always kind of like Christmas morning, because it's, you finally get to see, it's like you said, it's the culmination of the whole season, and now it's like, okay, this is the path to the championship. This is what's going to happen, and for a lot of teams, some of the stories we've told, like just having a winning season, like for Avella, their first winning season in
And
years.
Plum too. I mean,
And Plum, their best year since the early '80s. Fort Cherry breaking that long losing streak of 21 games, and then upsetting Rochester, who Coach Gary talked about how big that game against specifically Rochester was for them because of their history. And Freeport, they've had a lot of historical success. Like I said, made the playoffs 8 out of 10 years, or 8 out of 12 years that Coach Gaylot's been their coach. But so there's a lot of teams that I'll say they've had differing levels of success. We talked about your Thomas Jeffersons making at least the semifinals so many times, your Aliquippas that have made the WPIAL final 12 straight years, your Clairtons who have won 7 of the last 10 WPIAL titles. There's those teams that are great stories in and of themselves for what they've been able to accomplish. But some of the other teams, or some of my favorite stories are the ones that, accomplish things that they haven't done in years, like Plum winning their first conference title since the early 80s. Last year, Southmoreland broke a 40-year playoff drought. They hadn't made the playoffs since 1979. So things like that are the ones that, are really fun. And as you start to get into the playoffs, then you get into, this team hasn't made it this far in so many years and things like that. And usually the cream does rise to the crop and you get your premier matchups as you go along, but sometimes you get those upsets, and those are really fun to watch for too.
I totally agree with you. I think that everything that we've talked about, bringing to light all these good stories of the teams that, really deserve the attention, is great. So, well, all right. Well, we're going to play it by ear on what time, we tape the show. Remember, we can roll back our taping a little bit if you need a little more time to dig into that mayonnaise jar and find out who's actually going to make the playoffs and that. But it's been another great week. Ian, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to unveiling the WPIAL matchups with you, next week here. So until next week, I'm Badge. That's Ian. Thanks for watching.